My tree had been there for years, healthy, beautiful, and not bothering anyone. But this woman, she decided she didn't like it, and without telling me, had someone saw it down as if she owned the world. The problem? The tree didn't fall where she wanted it to. If there was one thing I never thought would give me a headache in my life, it was a tree. Simple, beautiful, healthy, full of green leaves, and with years of history in my backyard. I love that oak. It provided shade in the summer, made my garden more beautiful, and best of all, it had never been a problem for anyone. Well, until my neighbor decided it was a problem. Victoria Harrington had moved into the neighborhood about 6 months ago, and from day one she made it clear that she liked to be in charge. She always had something to complain about. Either someone's grass was too high, or the children were making noise in the park, or a dog barked more than she considered acceptable. And apparently, her newest obsession was my tree. At first, I didn't even realize that this was a problem for her. I saw Victoria look at the tree with an expression of contempt every time she walked past my house, but I thought it was all in my head. Until one day, out of the blue, she appeared at my door with that fake smile of someone who's about to talk garbage. "So, I want to talk to you about that tree in your yard," she said, pointing at my beloved oak as if she were denouncing a war criminal. I already felt a bomb coming. "What about it?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Well, I think it doesn't fit in with the aesthetics of the neighborhood. Besides, some leaves are falling in my yard, and that's starting to be a nuisance." I blinked a few times, processing the audacity. "Do you know what else fell in her yard? Rain. Did she want to have that canceled too?" Just as I was about to respond, my other neighbor, Dr. Leo Martinez, happened to be walking by with his dog. Leo was a respected botanist at the local university and had lived in our neighborhood for over 20 years. He paused at my gate, his gray-streaked beard and weathered face suggesting both wisdom and curiosity. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes darting between me and Victoria. Victoria's demeanor instantly changed. "Oh, Dr. Martinez, how lovely to see you. We were just discussing this tree situation." "Tree situation?" Leo raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "You mean James's white oak? It's one of the oldest in the county, probably close to 200 years old." I hadn't known that specific detail, and I could see it irritated Victoria even more. "Well, it's dropping leaves in my yard," Victoria complained, her voice taking on that shrill quality that meant business. Leo chuckled. "That's what trees do, Mrs. Harrington. They're rather famous for it." I tried to remain patient because I knew that these types of people don't accept a simple no. They need to hear an explanation as if the world revolved around their will. "Look, the tree is on my property. It's not causing any damage, and it's always been there. I don't see why I should remove it," I said firmly. Victoria frowned as if I'd said something offensive. "I just think it would be more polite of you to make a small adjustment for the good of the community." Yes, small adjustment, in this case, cutting down an entire 200-year-old tree just because she didn't like it. "That oak is part of our community heritage," Leo interjected, his tone more serious now. "In fact, I've been gathering documentation to have it registered as a heritage tree with the city." Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "Heritage tree? That sounds like an unnecessary complication for a simple landscaping issue." "Well, I disagree," I stated firmly. "The tree stays." She stared at me for a few seconds, clearly annoyed that I didn't give in, but to my surprise, she didn't argue. She just smiled in that forced way and said, "Well, I hope you don't regret it later," and left. Leo stayed behind, his dog sitting patiently at his feet. "Be careful with that one, James," he warned quietly. "She's been asking questions at the Homeowners Association about bylaws regarding tree removal. And I've heard rumors she's connected to Westview Development Group, the company trying to revitalize the east side of town." I asked. "The very same," Leo nodded. "Just keep an eye out. That oak might be worth more to certain people than you realize." I closed the door after Leo left and thought about it. What did Victoria mean by no regrets? Was she implying something? The idea that this woman would try something on her own crossed my mind, but I found it too absurd. After all, who in their right mind would take the liberty of going into someone else's yard and uprooting a tree that wasn't even theirs? Only apparently. I underestimated the level of insanity of this neighbor, because a few days later I woke up and my tree was simply gone. I woke up early as usual, made my coffee, and went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, and then I got the biggest fright of my life. My oak, which had been there for years, simply wasn't there anymore. All that remained in its place was a sawed-off trunk, scattered pieces of wood, and a few leaves left on the ground. It was as if a hurricane had swept through that exact spot in the yard and taken my tree away. But it hadn't been a hurricane, it hadn't been lightning, it hadn't been anything natural. Someone had cut down my tree, and at that moment, there was only one person capable of doing such a crazy thing. My blood was already boiling when, in the midst of my shock and outrage, I heard a strange noise coming from Victoria's house. Hurried footsteps, doors slamming, a muffled scream. That's when I realized something wasn't right. My tree was gone, but something had gone very wrong with this woman's plan, and I was going to find out what it was. As I stood there staring into the void where my oak used to be, trying to process what had happened, my phone rang. It was Leo. "James, you need to get outside right now," he said urgently. "Something's happened at Victoria's. My tree is gone." I replied, my voice hollow with shock. "I know," Leo said grimly, "and now it's on our house. I've already called the police, and I'm documenting everything. This is unprecedented." I could hear noises coming from Victoria's house. Doors slamming, rapid footsteps, and suddenly a muffled scream. My anger turned into pure curiosity. Why, if she had ordered my tree to be cut down, did she sound so desperate? I crossed the garden and went to the sidewalk to get a better view of her house, and that's when I saw it. And my God, the scene was a masterpiece of irony. The tree, it was lying right on the roof of her house. Yes, my oak, which Victoria hated so much, was now part of the structure of her house, and I had to hold back a smile. Her plan had gone horribly wrong. The roof was destroyed, broken tiles, pieces of wood scattered all over her yard, and a whole section of the treetop sticking out through the second-floor window. Leo was already there with his professional camera, methodically taking photographs from every angle. He was wearing what looked like an official vest with urban forest protection embroidered on it, something I'd never seen him in before. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "Evidence collection," he replied without looking up from his camera. "I'm on the city's tree preservation committee. This isn't just property damage. James, that oak was over 200 years old. The fines alone could be in the six figures." I stood there admiring the scene when Victoria herself appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of horror and despair. She was still in her bathrobe, hair disheveled, looking nothing like the polished HOA queen she portrayed herself as. The woman saw me standing there and stopped. She knew I'd found out, and before she could run away or make up some excuse, I decided to get straight to the point. "Wow," I said, feigning surprise. "Looks like someone had a little trouble with the tree." She opened and closed her mouth a few times as if trying to put words together that made sense, but the only thing that came out was, "That's an accident." "An accident?" Leo stepped forward, his camera still in hand. "Mrs. Harrington, I've documented over 30 deliberate cuts on that trunk. That's not an accident. That's a calculated action. Who are you to interfere?" Victoria snapped at Leo, her composure completely gone. "This is between me and him." "Actually," Leo replied calmly, "as a certified arborist and member of the city's tree preservation committee, this is very much my business. That oak was one of the last pre-settlement trees in our county." "Pre-settlement?" I echoed, surprised. Leo nodded. "It was here before the city was founded. I've been monitoring it for years." Victoria's face went even paler. I crossed my arms. "So, you're telling me that this tree just decided to fall on its own in the middle of the night and landed exactly on your roof?" She blushed for the first time since she'd moved into the neighborhood. She seemed at a loss for words, and I already knew exactly what had happened. After a few direct questions from me and a lot of stuttering from her, I put the facts together. She really did have my tree cut down. She called some guy who does pruning services and said she wanted to get rid of a nuisance tree. And, of course, she didn't mention that it wasn't her tree. The man came early in the morning when I was still asleep and started the job. Only there was a problem. He clearly didn't know what he was doing. Cutting down a large tree isn't just a matter of sawing it down and hoping it magically falls in the right place. There are techniques, there is calculation, there is safety involved. But this guy, he just stuck the saw in and hoped for the best. And the result? The best didn't happen. The tree fell in the worst possible place, and now Victoria was desperate because as well as destroying her own house, she had committed a crime. Yes, because cutting down someone else's tree without permission is a crime. And I knew she knew that because with every passing second she turned paler, looking for me to the house as if she was about to faint. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "Well, good luck sorting that out," I said, giving her a little smile, "because I'm going to call the police." And her face went white. "The police are already on their way. Leo informed her, checking his phone, along with representatives from the Environmental Protection Department and the Historical Preservation Society. Historical preservation? Victoria and I said simultaneously. Leo nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. I was preparing the paperwork to register that oak as a historical landmark. The tree predates our town's founding by at least 50 years. There are photographs of it from the 1880s when it was already a mature tree. If before Victoria had been red with embarrassment, now she was pale with fear. Police? She stammered as if the word was something completely absurd in the situation. Yes, I replied, picking up my cell phone. You destroyed my property. You cut down my tree without permission. That's called a crime. And an environmental crime at that, Leo added, still documenting everything with his camera. The penalties are significantly higher. She widened her eyes and took a step forward, raising her hands as if she were about to attempt some kind of negotiation. Wait, we can solve this without involving the authorities, right? Of course, now that she'd realized she'd screwed up her own life, she wanted an amicable settlement. Friendly, I laughed sarcastically. Like when you came to demand that I cut down the tree because it didn't fit in with the neighborhood? She opened and closed her mouth without replying. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, and a well-dressed man stepped out. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather portfolio. Mrs. Harrington, he called out, his voice sharp with irritation. What exactly is going on here? The closing is in 3 days. Victoria's expression shifted from panic to something closer to terror. Mr. Blackwood, I can explain. Leo leaned toward me and whispered, Richard Blackwood, CEO of Westview Development. Interesting timing. You told me these properties would be ready to go, Blackwood continued, surveying the damaged house and fallen tree with obvious disgust. Our investors are expecting a smooth transaction. Victoria was now looking between Blackwood, Leo, me, and her damaged house, appearing trapped from all sides. Without further ado, I called the police. And in front of her, hello, I'd like to report a crime of destruction of property. My neighbor had a tree cut down in my yard without permission, and now it's fallen right on top of her house. The person on the other end of the line took a second to answer. They were probably trying to process the level of irony of this situation. The attendant asked me a few basic questions, and I explained everything. We'll send a car, he said at the end. They're already on their way, Leo informed me. The woman heard this and panicked, and that's when the real show began. This is ridiculous, she screamed, throwing her hands up in the air. You can't do this to me. Do this to her? My tree no longer exists. Its roof has become a pile of rubble. And I'm the problem? I crossed my arms, waiting. She continued the scandal, pacing back and forth, muttering things like this can't be happening, and it's just a tree. Meanwhile, Blackwood was on his phone, speaking in hushed but angry tones. I caught fragments. Zoning approval, heritage designations, environmental assessment. Leo nudged me. I think we're witnessing something bigger than a neighbor dispute, James. Victoria here might be more than just an obnoxious HOA queen. Her show went on for a good 10 minutes until the police arrived. The officers began by asking the obvious. What happened here? Victoria tried to speak first. It was an accident. I stood there with my arms crossed, waiting to see how far she would go with this lie. The policeman frowned. Okay, whose tree was it? It was his. The policeman turned to me. Sir, can you explain? That tree had been in my yard for years. She came to ask me to cut it down. I refused. Then, without my permission, she had someone cut it down in the middle of the night. The problem? It fell on her house. Officer, Leo stepped forward. I'm Dr. Leonardo Martinez, certified arborist and member of the city's Tree Preservation Committee. This oak was a documented historical specimen, approximately 200 years old, and a candidate for heritage status. The officer looked surprised and made a note. That changes things significantly. Victoria looked like she was going to explode. He has no proof, she shouted. He's making this up because he wants to hurt me. Oh, I have no proof. You know what's wonderful? Neighbors. And guess what? 2 of them were watching the whole thing from the sidewalk. And it only took one of them to open his mouth and say, actually, I saw the guy with the chainsaw earlier today. It wasn't him, it was someone else. I found it strange because it looked like they were cutting without anyone being there. I have time-stamped photographic evidence of the cutting in progress, Leo added, showing the officer his camera. I've been monitoring this tree for my research and happened to catch the entire incident. The officer looked through Leo's camera and nodded solemnly. Meanwhile, Blackwood had been inching back toward his SUV, clearly trying to distance himself from the situation. The officer noticed. "Sir, could I get your information as well? You appear to be involved in this situation." Blackwood froze. "I'm simply a business associate of Mrs. Harrington. This is a personal matter that doesn't concern me." "Actually," Leo interjected, "as CEO of Westview Development, your interest in properties with heritage trees about to be designated as protected might very much concern the authorities." The policeman turned to Victoria on the spot. "Ma'am, so you hired someone to cut down his tree?" She froze. She opened and closed her mouth, trying to formulate a lie, but it was too late. "Ma'am, come with us to the police station to explain yourself," said the policeman, crossing his arms. And it was at that very moment that I saw the absolute desperation in her eyes. She knew she was going to get screwed. "Officer," Blackwood suddenly spoke up, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Westview Development has a contract with Mrs. Harrington to purchase several properties in this neighborhood, but we were unaware of any irregular activities to prepare the properties." Victoria's head snapped toward him. "Richard, you specifically said the properties needed to be obstacle-free before closing." The officer raised his eyebrows. "Obstacle-free?" Blackwood adjusted his tie nervously. "A standard real estate term. It simply means resolved of any liens or encumbrances." "He's lying," Victoria shouted. "He told me the development couldn't proceed with heritage trees on the property because they'd restrict the building footprint. He said to handle it before the city's preservation committee could file the paperwork." Leo's eyes narrowed as he looked between Victoria and Blackwood. "So this wasn't just about leaves in your yard, was it, Mrs. Harrington? This was about making the properties more valuable for development. What now?" Now, there was no way out. Victoria started gesticulating like crazy. "This can't be happening," she screamed. "I was just trying to improve the neighborhood." The policeman raised his eyebrows. "Cutting down a tree without permission and destroying your own house." "It was an accident," she insisted. "It wasn't an accident," the policeman retorted. "It was negligence and trespassing. And potentially conspiracy to commit environmental crimes," added another voice. A woman in a Department of Environmental Protection jacket had arrived and was surveying the scene. "Heritage trees carry special protections under City Ordinance 47B. Her face went white. The scene of her getting into the car was the best part of my day, and I knew it wasn't over yet because this woman was still going to have to pay for what she had done. "Mr. Blackwood," the officer said, "we'll need you to come down to the station as well to clarify your involvement in this situation." Blackwood's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "This is outrageous. I'm a respected businessman in this community." "Then I'm sure you'll be happy to cooperate with our investigation," the officer replied smoothly. Victoria got into the car with no other choice. And the best part, the whole neighborhood was watching. Nothing like a good dose of public humiliation for someone who has spent months trying to boss everyone around. As Blackwood was escorted to a separate patrol car, Leo turned to me with a significant look. "This might be bigger than just your tree, James. Westview has been buying up properties all through this area. I've been wondering why they're so interested in this particular neighborhood." "You think there's something else going on?" I asked. "I'm not sure," Leo admitted, "but I'm going to find out. Properties with heritage designations are protected from certain types of development. If they were trying to avoid those restrictions." She was taken to give evidence, but I knew it wouldn't end there because now, in addition to the police on the case, I also had something else against her, a nice lawsuit. And I was going to make every penny of it. With the confusion momentarily resolved, I went back to my house and made another call, this time to my lawyer. "Greg," I began laughing. "My neighbor cut down my tree without permission, and now her house is a pile of rubble." He couldn't believe his ears. "She did what?" I explained everything, and within a few minutes, we had a plan. First, I filed a formal complaint with the town hall for destruction of private property. Then I filed a civil suit against her for damages and removal costs because, you know what? The problem was, now the tree was still there. The roof of her house was literally hugging the top of the tree, and removing it was going to cost a small fortune. But me? I wasn't going to pay anything. Let whoever caused the problem sort it out. Leo stopped by later that afternoon with some surprising news. The Heritage Tree Committee met for an emergency session. He told me, even though the oak is down, they're designating the stump and root system as historically significant. "Can they do that?" I asked, surprised. "They can, and they did," Leo nodded. which means any development on your property would have to preserve a 30-foot radius around where the tree stood, effectively making your backyard undevelopable. But I don't want to develop it, I pointed out. Exactly, Leo smiled. But Westview Development did. According to records I pulled this afternoon, Victoria signed an option agreement to sell them your property along with hers and 3 others on this block. Only she can't sell what she doesn't own. She was planning to pressure me to sell. I realized. And when that didn't work, she took more drastic measures, Leo concluded. The tree was just collateral damage in a much bigger plan. And of course, she had her house insurance. When the insurance agents arrived to assess the damage, it was hilarious to see the look on their faces. How exactly did this happen? One of them asked, trying to understand how a whole tree had ended up there. I smiled and replied, ask the owner of the house. She's the one who had it cut down. The insurance company wasn't happy, and she soon found out that she couldn't get a single penny for the repairs. Do you know why? Because it was her negligence. Insurance only covers unexpected accidents, not idiots who cut down trees without permission and destroy their own house. In other words, she was going to have to pay for everything out of her own pocket. After Victoria was released from the police station, I thought she would at least try to keep quiet, but to my surprise, she had the audacity to come to my door. The doorbell rang. I opened it, and there she was with giant dark circles under her eyes and an expression of pure despair. You need to withdraw this complaint, she said without so much as a hello. I smiled. No. She widened her eyes. But I'm already at a loss. My insurance won't cover the damage. I'll spend a fortune on repairs. And Westview Development has withdrawn their purchase offer, Leo added, appearing from around the corner of my house where he'd been examining the tree stump. I just got word from the Preservation Committee. Victoria's head whipped toward him. This is all your fault. If you hadn't been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. If I recall correctly, Leo interrupted calmly. You're the one who trespassed and destroyed property that wasn't yours. As for my involvement, protecting our community's natural heritage is literally my job. The development would have been good for everyone, Victoria insisted. Property values would have doubled at the cost of the neighborhood's character, its history, and its natural environment, Leo countered. Not everyone measures value in dollars, Mrs. Harrington. I just shrugged. It's not my problem. She stared at me as if I were a monster. You're ruining my life. That was the best part. No, ma'am. You ruined your own life. There might be a way to salvage something from this situation, Leo suggested unexpectedly. Both Victoria and I looked at him in surprise. The Environmental Protection Department is considering a restorative justice approach, he explained. Instead of maximum fines and potential jail time, they might accept community service in the form of participation in the city's reforestation program. And he hesitated, looking at me. And what? I prompted. And if you were willing to accept replacement trees instead of purely monetary compensation, it could significantly reduce her financial burden while actually doing some good for the environment. I considered this. On one hand, I wanted Victoria to pay dearly for what she'd done. On the other, no amount of money would bring back my 200-year-old oak. Victoria looked between us, momentarily hopeful. Of course, Leo continued. This would also require Mrs. Harrington to provide a full statement about Westview Development's involvement in the incident. The hope in Victoria's eyes flickered and died. Richard would destroy me professionally. More than you've already destroyed yourself? I asked pointedly. She tried to argue. She tried to cry. She tried to play the victim. But I just shut the door in her face because the reality was that for the first time, she was paying for her actions, and honestly, it was more than deserved. A few weeks later, the case had taken over the entire neighborhood. Victoria had to pay for the repairs out of her own pocket. She had to pay all the fees for removing the tree, and, as a final touch, she had to compensate me for the destruction of my property. In an unexpected turn of events, the city used her case to launch a broader investigation into Westview Development's practices. It turned out they had been systematically targeting properties with potential heritage designations across the city, using various tactics to clear obstacles before preservation orders could be filed. Leo's documentation proved invaluable to investigators, and he found himself suddenly in the spotlight as an environmental advocate. He invited me to a tree planting ceremony where the first of 20 new oaks, paid for by Victoria's restitution, was being planted in the community park. It's not the same as your tree, he acknowledged as we watched volunteers prepare the planting site. Nothing could replace something that lived through 2 centuries. But it's a start. And in 200 years, someone else will appreciate it. I agreed. Victoria's lawyer called me to tell me that she didn't want to take the case to court because she knew she'd lose badly. In other words, she paid me without even arguing. And the best part? After all this, her house was put up for sale because she didn't want to stay in the neighborhood anymore. Maybe because now everyone knew what kind of person she was. The for sale sign had barely been planted in her front yard when Leo approached me with a surprising proposition. The Tree Preservation Committee has a small budget, he explained. Not enough to purchase her property outright, but perhaps with some community fundraising. You want to buy her house? I asked, surprised. I want to turn it into an urban arboretum, he corrected. A living museum of native trees, open to the public, with a special monument explaining the history of the great oak that once stood in your yard. The perfect way to ensure nothing like this happens again. 6 months later, where Victoria's house once stood, a beautiful open-air educational center welcomed school groups and community members to learn about our local ecosystem. And on my property, circling the preserved stump of my ancient oak, 5 young saplings were taking root. The next generation of a legacy that Victoria Harrington had failed to destroy. And you know what? None of us missed her. And if you like this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.